I think we just move on down the line to our friend Bob Quinn. Welcome back, Bob, and a Gray-School alumni.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I'm very thankful to be a part of this fantastic conference. I've really enjoyed it, and hope I can add a few ideas. I was asked to talk about two things. First, adapting farm practice for dry land, and the second one was employee ownership, and well, the idea of transferring to the next generation is what I took it as. But to give you an idea of what we've seen here in the Northern Great Plains, so I'm a regenerative organic farmer about 30 years ago since we changed to that kind of a system. But my family came 120 years ago to the semi-arid Great Plains, and well, it was my great-grandfather came to Washington first in 1900 in Eastern Washington, and then moved to Big Sandy, Montana, north central Montana, about 1919. So we've been here about 100 years. My grandfather started our farm in 1920, and my great-grandfather brought with him. So we've been adapting for 100 years into the short grass prairies anyway. And the first adaptation my great-grandfather brought with him from Eastern Washington was the idea of summer fallow. That is that you work the ground and leave it fallow 1 year to collect enough rain to grow a crop the second year. And we only get about 12 inches of rainfall a year. 40% of that comes in May and June. So those are our rainy months. And then it goes down from there into a pretty hot, dry summer. And the summer fallow idea worked really well in the beginning. And then when the 30s came and it quit raining, then it turned very quickly into the Dust Bowl, and that was a disaster. My grandfather, his adaptation of that was to put away the plow, and he started using implements that more undercut they didn't give up summer fallow, but they left as much residue on the surface as possible, using what we call chisel plows and just undercutting weeds rather than turning the soil upside down the way a plow does. When my father started, his innovations were making, turning big blocks of fields into strips, and made narrow strips of those big blocks so that one strip would be fallow and one strip would be in crop. And so you'd really cut down the erosion potential, both of wind and water in that way. The adaptation that I made when I came along was converting to regenerative organic agriculture. And so we started growing, not leaving that land fallow, but planting legumes on that ground early in the spring or sometimes in the fall, previous fall. And we rotated between alfalfa and sweet clovers and peas and sometimes buckwheat, which isn't a legume, of course, but it has other values. And I came to realize that in rotating those crops, we were adding more diversity to our system and improving its stability. And so now we rotate those crops every other year, and we grow our cash crops on the off year after the soil building crop year. The thing that I'm experimenting now, I'm starting to do a couple experiments I'm working on, and that is planting more spring crops in the fall. Some of our previous speakers mentioned our winters are less cold. Our summers are sometimes a little more hot, and the rain is stopping sooner. And so the spring seeded crops are becoming a higher and higher risk. So I'm experimenting with planting spring type wheats in the fall, and even other crops like safflower in the fall, and see if we can't, if they survive the winter, they will mature much earlier before the rains quit, and we'll have a much better opportunity for a good crop. The other innovation or adaptation I think that we need to look at as farmers is in watching this crazy weather cycle. And this has been the second year now in maybe 10 that we've had an open winter, whereas we were able to seed in January. So a couple of weeks ago, I was out seeding, doing trial seedings of safflower, which is a kind of a frost seeding idea. The seeds won't germinate this time of year, but they'll be in the ground. Everything was thawed out. We had a very warm January. the ground was thawed and I was able to seed in the moisture. I've seeded winter wheat in January before, and there's still plenty of time for vernalization, and it came through just fine. Not quite as good as the fall seeded winter wheat, but much better than the spring wheat. I'm looking for winter hardy varieties now with large different selections from seed banks, and think that might be an adaptation that could help us. The other thing I'm working on, and I've been working on this for about 10 or 15 years, is growing my own food. And so we're growing vegetables on the prairie, dryland vegetables. We have no possibility for irrigation. The groundwater is very salty and would completely ruin the ground if you irrigated with that for very many years in a row. So we don't have that possibility, but I've been experimenting with different types of particularly storage. I started with storage vegetables like potatoes and squash and onions. And I was surprised at how good a luck I had with that. Then we moved into other crops, corn, sweet corn, carrots, tomatoes even, and planting. And what I found, if we spread the plants out and give them about 3 times more space to gather water than is normally done, say in the Midwest, where they don't even water their lawns, for heaven's sakes, we can find that those crops then have enough water to produce just about, in many cases, on my potatoes, I measured this very, very carefully. Our potato plants produce almost exactly the same amount as a irrigated or a potato coming from a area where there's a lot of rainfall and they're planted close together. My potatoes produce as much from each plant as they do, but I only have 1/3 as many plants. If you're wondering about, I did a lot of experiments to find this conclusion. And what I realized is that if compared to the rainfall in the Midwest, ours is about 1/3. So that those ratios are about the same. So if you live in an area where your rainfall is 1/2, maybe the rain in, say, Ohio or Illinois, those areas in the Midwest, then maybe try a spacing of 1/2 of what is normal for plants per acre or per foot, or whatever your spacing you're working with is. And what we found is 1/3 the amount of rain, so we plant 3 times or 1/3 the amount of plants, and so that's worked out very, very, very well. So those are the kinds of things that we're continuing to do. I always think if being a regenerative organic farmer, if you're not changing, you're not really organic, because things change all the time. They always have, and they always will. I think we're in a time with more rapid change now, and it's even more important to be looking at opportunities. You know, the warming that we've been talking about in the summers, it's not all bad. I grew, when I was a kid, watermelons every year. I never got anything bigger than a grapefruit, and it was never any good. And the last few years, I've been growing watermelons that are 30 and 35 pounds, and they're delicious. And so take advantage, we need to take advantage of some of turn our liabilities into assets. That's what I always try to do. I brought it along to show you my spaghetti squash. This is really a great squash. I'm trying to eat everything I grow and grow everything I eat. I'm up to about 85% now of my entire diet is grown right on my farm. And these spaghetti squash will store until late June when the summer squash are starting to produce. And these small ones, these angel hair ones, are just enough for my wife and I for a nice meal, and we don't have a lot of leftovers. And anyway, we try to adopt for where we're at. As far as employee ownership, I've had not only my farm, but 4 or 5 different businesses that I've delved into in different areas over my life. My farm, to tell a little bit about my history, my farm was passed on to me by my parents, who incorporated the farm, and then they gifted me shares sort of as sweat equity. We weren't making, just like most farms, you don't make a big salary, but you have lots of perks, like a house to live in and a car to drive and a pickup and that sort of thing. It goes with the farm. And so we didn't need a lot of cash. So we didn't have a lot of cash to buy things from my parents, but they had other a source of income they didn't need to cash out on the farm. So we had a transition over, say, 20 years, where over a 20-year period where I was working on the farm full time, I eventually inherited the farm while my folks are still alive. In fact, my mother's still alive. She's 97 now, and so she inquires what's going on, of course, from time to time. But the farm's now in our hands. Now it's a time for us to look at the next generation. Well, none of my kids showed up to be interested in the farm. So we have, just in the last 2 years, last 2.5 years now, rented the whole farm out, or most of it, to our employees. And so now it's their turn. I had my turn, now it's their turn. I think it's really a sad thing when some people hang on to stuff so long that they go to the grave with it, and then it's a little bit of a hassle for the next generation to figure out how to put it all together. If you can be a part of putting together the transition to the next generation, I think it's a huge, huge advantage for both sides. So that's one of the things we're trying to do. We have, when you do that, I think one thing you need to do if you're on the leaving end, you have to understand to let things go. The next generation will never do the things the same as you did, and that's okay. In fact, it might even be better in many cases. So just be okay with that and let things go. Let them make their mistakes the same way you made yours. I mean, I'm always here for advice or to bounce ideas off and that sort of thing. The other thing that I'm trying to do is I'm in the midst of creating an organic, regenerative organic research, education and resource center out of 640 acres out of the middle of my farm. So I'm going to take that section and donate it to a foundation that we'll create, and it'll be a research center. So that's kind of a different idea, but can be done. Why not? I don't have any kids here to farm right now, and there's plenty of room still for my renters. They've also expanded into renting other acres, so they have a unit that's viable for them. I don't know if will have any grandkids that come back, and they might be interested in the next decade or two, but the ground is still here. But one section of it at least will be dedicated to a research center for the Northern Great Plains, which will look at all kind of aspects of agriculture, of different plants that grow and different systems to make those successful, particularly in the changing climate and everything else we have to do with studying no-till, studying different vegetables and orchards, fruit trees and berry bushes that can survive here and not only survive but do well. And we'll have a culinary aspect where people will be taught how to take crops from the field right to the table with all kinds of little schools and seminars and whatnot. And then we're looking to add to that a medical aspect where we'll have medical doctors in residence who can prescribe not pills as medicine, but food as medicine. And that's been one of my big drivers to try to teach the theory, not better than the theory, the teaching from ancient Greece that food should be our medicine and medicine should be our food. So those are just a couple ideas that I've done over the past. I've had a few companies with employees that I've just sold to my employees. I've never really sold anything to venture capitalists. I don't like that idea. They normally just strip things out and move it away. I want to revitalize rural Montana, where I am right here. And I think the more we do that, the better off we're going to be. And so those businesses that have been sold to employees, they usually are able to take off and do better than I ever did because they're focused on it. And my focus is kind of here, there, and all over. But my favorite part of work is having the ideas and initiating new things. And when it comes to maintaining them and growing them, then I like to turn it over to people who are really geared for that. So I hope that might give you a few ideas to think about. And if we still have a minute left for questions, I'll be glad to respond to that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. And yeah, we had one question coming just asking about what varieties of watermelon you're planting to get those 35 pounders. And maybe just in the last minute too, I'd love to see if you want to elucidate any on some of the questions we were talking about with Dr. Bache about local grain economics and supply chain infrastructure, especially when you're maybe not near in areas, that aren't near markets. I'm assuming Big Sandy isn't a huge direct local market. So I bet you've been pretty innovative in developing your products. Well,
the answer to the first question is Crimson Sweet has been the one that's a watermelon that's been the biggest for us and most consistent. And that's kind of a mainline watermelon. You can buy the seed anywhere. As far as the second question, that's actually how I got into my first farm or auxiliary to the farm business with Montana Flour and Grains. Created that in 1983 in order to market our high protein wheat. We weren't organic then, but we were growing high protein bread wheat and dumping it in the elevator with everybody else and taking $3 a bushel, which could hardly make a living for us. My folks and I were farming together at that time. And our farm could support one family just fine, but not two. And so we looked at something that would help out and being able to market it directly to whole grain bakers. We found in Southern California with the help of a distant cousin who lived there. So I put together a team in Montana and California to kind of put the business together and get it off the ground. And that worked out very, very well. From there, we went to organic production and organic stone ground flour, and then to ancient grains. So then we introduced our Kamut project from that platform. It was great to have a platform on which to build upon. First, I got us into food shows, got me introduced into all kinds of potential markets outside of Montana. Big Sandy's only 600 people. You can grow enough food for 600 people in a farm that's fraction of mine. Right now I've downsized from 4,000 acres to 4, and I'm farming 4, and most of it's experiments, and probably a half or quarter of an acre would be all I need to grow for my family. So we need to, in a sparse population that we have in Montana of about 1 million people, and it's the 4th largest state, we need to be looking outside our borders, but we don't need to live in food deserts. So we send all of our wheat out. For heaven's sakes, we should have some flour mills around here locally, and everybody else should too, I think, so they can have easy access to what they grow and then diversify what they're also growing so that they can have more food grown regionally. I think that's very, very important. And that's been touched on already today. Food sovereignty is a big, big effort of mine, and to help other people to achieve it is one of my goals.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for to squeeze one more in. I see a question that popped up in the chat here from Harold. Do you have any Kamut? Have you had any success growing Kamut in wetter soil climates, or do you have varieties of?
Well, so this is where we learned. So I've experimented growing the Kamut Coruscant wheat. It's a very near relative to durum, all over the world except China. We haven't been to China to experiment, but we've been to Kazakhstan and to South America, to North Africa. In some places, it really grows very well. In some areas, the biggest, so the rule of thumb that we've come up with, if you have enough water or enough rain to grow corn, you're going to have too much rain to avoid blacktip disease, fungal diseases that attack this grain. It has no resistance to diseases that are prevalent in wetter climates. So it's not so much the soil or the length of growing season or whatever. It's how the rains come. So this grain originated in Mesopotamia. We've done some experiments in Israel, and it does fantastic there. Way better than Montana, actually. But there's no rain on it during the last 6 weeks before harvest, and that's what's the most important. In the south, they're closer to the equator. You're planting it in the fall and harvesting it in the spring before it gets too hot. And of course, in the temperate zones like we are in Montana, we're planting it in the spring. And that's one of the actual experiments we're doing, looking for fall or for winter hardiness, and so we can plant it in the fall because we see trouble coming with the spring planted stuff. I don't know if that answers your question, but that gives you a little bit of an idea. And we've done no breeding on it to make it more disease resistant. I think we find there's just terrific medicinal properties of this. People who can eat modern wheat can eat this. We don't really know why, and we don't want to really start changing things. We're happy that we have that property, and we don't want to focus on increasing yield and sacrificing nutrition and flavors and that sort of thing. So we haven't done very much with breeding.
Understandable, and also what I hear you saying too is, maybe some of these regions that are starting to experience more and more dry summer weather, maybe there's more opportunities for growing that in the future. And
wherever you are, I think if wherever you are, just try to find the plants that grow best and have the best potential. And don't be, I should have been, I wasn't growing watermelon 40 years ago, but I am now. And it's probably not, we're not going to plant 100 acres of it, but we can start to see the diversity that can come with climate change and the different areas that we're at. We should take advantage of that.
All right. Dan, off to you.
All right. Thank you, Bob Quinn. And here is Bob's book, Grain by Grain. Came out about a year ago with co-author Liz Carlisle.